Okay, we are back. There's a couple more things I'm going to show you. Again, this is through a photograph I've taken, and this is the counter or the second part to this editing we're doing this week. So we've already gone through, used a spot healing brush, and we've played around a little bit with content aware. The first thing I'm going to do, and as a rule of thumb, you should probably do this before we get to this stage in the editing, but there's something I'm going to show you about converting things to smart objects, and I need a couple layers in order to show you that. So I'm really quickly just going to go through, play around with the brightness and contrast. I'm going to actually increase that contrast. Play around with that. We're going to just bump up the contrast a little bit, and I'm taking down the brightness a bit because it was a snowy day. There's a lot of stuff happening there, and I'm going to minimize that. Now I don't have to worry about it. Go back under layers. I'm going to go back again, play around with the hue and saturation. So I'm going to bump up the saturation. I'm going to make this more colorful, more bold and in your face. The hue I can play around with if I wanted to, but I'm going to leave it as is. Because I'm not too worried about what's happening with the color scheme and the rest of the background. So now if I go to my layers panel, you can see I have 3 different layers. Again, if I click on the eye, I can unsee what I've already changed. So in order to use some of the filters, one thing that helps is if I convert it to a smart object. So if I hold down all 3, I'm going to hit shift and select all 3 layers. I'm going to go to filter, and I'm going to click on convert for smart filters. And it will say the selected layer will be converted into a smart object. I'll say okay. And again, basically this takes all of my layers and it puts it in a package so that the filter is applied to everything and not just one part of my file, not just one layer. I've converted my object to a smart object. And from here, I'm going to try applying a filter. And I'm going to play around with tilting my shift. So I go to blur gallery, click tilt shift, and then this appears. And in its natural state, it's horizontal, but since this picture isn't really one where my object is horizontal, I'm going to change it to vertical. So this target is the center of where that effect is starting. So I'm going to move that. Let's try it up here. And you can see now my blurry section starts where those trees are, and it starts a little bit beyond that cupcake. If I scroll around, you can see I see a set of double arrows. That lets me move this effect. And I'm going to keep it a little bit vertical. I'm not yet going to go straight vertical, but I can then, when I get this kind of straight double arrow, I can move the radius of that effect. So if I want more of that cupcake to be in focus, all I'm doing, and you'll see sometimes I grab that, is I'm just shifting that out a little bit. One thing you'll notice, if I go too far out, I have to pay attention to the tilt shift that's happening in the background. So you can see how this tree is half blurry and half in focus. That doesn't look very good. So I'm going to bring this back in, and I can live with what's happening now. So you can see I can play around with that. There are different filters and different effects. You can play with the blur tool. Again, this will change how the pixels, how blurred it gets. You probably don't want to be this far in the dark with it, right? I'm leaving it at its default for this image. It works pretty well for me. If you click on distortion, that will also change again how much of that background is being distorted. So now I'm okay with this. I'm just going to hit OK. It's going to save that blur. Now I have this blurred image. And you can see I have this white box rectangle underneath. If I double click on it, it's going to let me alter that. So just be aware, if I decide, okay, I want to save this, I can save it at this point. Going back to my layers, if I decide I don't want the filter, I can always delete this. And you can see what it looks like before and what it looks like after. Before, after. The other option too that you have with filters, again, you can feel free to explore them. I'm only going over a couple, is this black and white filter. So if I go down, I click to this half mask down here, I can literally click on black and white and it will take my image and it will change it into a black and white image. And the nice thing about this is that you'll see reds, yellows, greens, cyans, blues, and magentas. They're all listed. It's all the value for the original picture. If I want to play around with the balance of the value of the original color or hue in that photograph, I can slide to make things darker. So it's taking all the reds in the picture in this case and it's making them darker. Or I can take all the reds in the picture and make them lighter. So right now it's getting kind of space alien-y. This will let you play around with what kind of black and white image you end up with. So say I want to play around, and some of them are kind of noticeable. Like right now I can see the road is changing. I'm gonna make it a little darker. Depending on what your picture is, some of them will be really obvious and some of them won't be. Like cyan will probably, I was gonna say, that would show up pretty easily in my image. And you can see now it's turned into this really dark, ominous picture. Blues will change a lot. I'm gonna lift that up. That was really dark. And then magentas, again, I can keep it. I want to have a good range of dark values, medium values, and light values. So if I click that double caret to the side, it hides it again and I can go back to my layers. Again, if I don't want this, I can literally click this eye and it stops displaying it. Say I don't want this to be a black and white image. I'm just going to take this, throw it in this trash can, boom, that's gone. I don't have to worry about it. Actually, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to decide for me, I don't really like what's happening with this smart filter. So let's go ahead and delete that. And now I don't have that blur effect on it anymore. I didn't really feel like it was adding to the picture. You'll see that as we go throughout the semester, I will show you images. I don't necessarily always love them. But say I change my mind and I'm like, man, I wish I hadn't deleted that. I can go edit, undo, delete filter mask, edit, step backward, and it will reapply that filter right there. So again, there's always kind of a forwards and backwards kind of thing that's happening here. So I'm gonna delete it though. I don't want to keep it. The final thing, let's go ahead and flatten this image because we're not gonna come back into Photoshop at this point and rework it. If you want to work on files in Photoshop, make sure that you save it as a Photoshop file. So if I'm like halfway through something, don't save it as a JPEG because then I will not be able to access those layers. Save it as a Photoshop file. For this purpose, say we're all done with this image, we're happy, we're gonna upload this is all good. The next step, there's adding a sharpening filter. And then the final thing, I'm gonna talk a little bit about file size. We didn't talk about that last week. So if I go to filter and I go to sharpen, I'm gonna go to smart sharpen. This is gonna give me an idea of what my image is gonna look like. So you can see it's really, really zoomed in. It says at 100%. Right now, I wanna keep it at 100%, but I don't want to focus. I wanna choose something that's a little bit more the center point. There we go, like the cupcake, something that's in focus. The amount, you can play around with this. It's set to default. You can see if I up it to 472% right now, I can't see too much of a difference. What makes a big difference is the radius. So if I increase it to 28.5, you can see how really defined all of those edges and boundaries be. Oh my gosh, you can see the whole screen changes. I want to try and keep this fairly low. I don't want this to look super stylized. I'm going to say, let's keep it at 2 pixels. Again, I wouldn't usually go more than 5 pixels, and even that is kind of loud. If you have parts of your image that are really pixelated and blurry, I'm trying to find an example of this for you. This one doesn't have too much noise. You can reduce the noise. Again, don't have too much to worry about here. So I'm going to leave this at 10%. I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to sharpen that image up. The reason I might sharpen an image up is because it gives it just a little bit more definition, makes it look just a little bit more professional when I go to print these. Again, I don't want to over sharpen these images, especially when I'm printing. That will be a big problem for me. So the final thing I'm going to show you is adjusting file size, and I'm going to show you that in one more video. So bear with me. Pause this here, make your adjustments. Again, get ready to save that.